Iorì Wase's podcast is brought to you by First Nations Fiber.
First Nations Wireless is now First Nations Fiber. You've seen our team working through the community to get you connected. From the new development to the OCR, from the 207 to Clay Mountains, FN Fiber makes fiber optic internet easy for everyone. Coming to Ganhawaga soon. Visit radio.fnfiber.com to sign up today.
Welcome to the Beading Table. You're here with Leith, Mahkewa, and Tekaronhiahkhwa Standup. And today's topic we're going to talk about is a mishmash of all kinds of things. It's called bead soup. So Tekaronhiahkhwa, where should we start today?
So I think in our last podcast we had touched a little bit on profiting off of other people's design and just selling patterns and designs and stuff like that. So there were a few questions that people had brought up, I think on our Instagram.
Yeah, and I will ask a question since I kind of don't have very much experience with this because I'm not necessarily a teacher of beadwork. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that was brought up was when someone is making profit from a pattern or design that you have shared with them. Now, I know you have experience teaching, and we've had some other conversations with other beaders in the community about their teaching as well. So how do you feel about that question?
I don't really know. Honestly, not that I don't know. I guess I don't really have too much feelings on it. For me, I look at it, if people have taken my classes or I make patterns and I sell them at the shop. So once they're gone, then I don't really care, I guess. It's not a big deal to me. It's kind of like, okay, well, to each their own after that. It doesn't really, it doesn't bother me. We were talking earlier though about me. It's almost because I'm giving consent for those. I've drawn them, I've given them, I made my peace with it, so in that way, I don't really care. There's a difference between, it kind of goes back into what we were talking about in our last podcast about copying and things like that. Now, if I were to see one of my patterns that I didn't give consent to and somebody just kind of, took them and then they're selling it everywhere and profiting off of it. And then, yeah, that bugs me. So that's the differences, I guess, in that, in that sense. In that regard.
Yeah. So what about so everyone not everyone, I should say, but within our community, there are various styles that people kind of tend to do more often than not. And then when I mean styles, I mean like literal designs. And you can kind of see people's flower images that they tend to use on other people's things who've taken their classes. Would you say that because just now what your statement was is that because once you have a class, it's kind of given to the masses and it's like you said, you made your peace with it and whatnot. So people profiting off of that is fine for you?
Yeah, I don't mind if it's something that I've given. And
has anybody ever inboxed you and said, "Oh, I just saw your design and so is selling it"?
Probably offhand, I can't remember, but. And
is that necessary, or you're like, I don't really care?
No, like when it's classes or stuff that I've sold it, then I don't care. I don't care. Like I said, I've given it, so it doesn't bother me at all. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Do you have people who often go up to bat for you in terms of like if they've seen something that you might have done and then like rally on your behalf or send it to you to rally?
Yeah.
To start, not to start something, because I don't think it's to start like a situation.
But like a heads up, sometimes of like a heads up. Yes, I've had that happen. I've had people like, I talked about it previously on like that I had somebody kind of copy me, I guess, in a sense, on a project that I did years ago. And for years, I had mentioned that I only addressed the situation with the lady like 3 years after the whole thing. And no word of a lie, I had like a million posts, like people tagging me constantly every time the lady posted her image. So I was constantly being tagged in it. And it was different people all the time, like tagging me like, "Hey, this looks like yours." Mm-hmm. So stuff like that. So yeah, in that sense, I did have a lot of support in that way, so, which was nice. It was nice to but yeah, people have done that for me. So I don't know, like, when it comes to that, I don't know how everyone feels. I can't really talk for everybody. But yeah, for me, I don't really have like there's a difference between my consent giving it, where I don't care, it's totally fine. And then, like I said, like somebody replicating it and then making profit off of it. Like, I'm not cool with that.
Now, I have a little bit of a dilemma. So I normally do custom work, right? And well, obviously with custom work, it's designed something for somebody specifically and all that kind of stuff. I don't often do just like off the fly, just random things. How do you feel about replicating your own designs? And we had talked about it. I mean, I just remembered we talked about it on the last podcast, but do you replicate your own designs?
I have. Yes, I think I have. Have I? I'm not sure, actually. Offhand, I can't think, but I don't really have a problem with it. But there's differences. So if it's a pattern that I've made generically, just in general, where it's like, oh, okay, well, today I feel like doing this or whatever, I'll repeat it in different colors or whatever because it's not specific and it's not for someone, you know. But if it was an order, if it was, you know, in that case, then I don't replicate because that was specific for somebody. So in that sense, no, then I wouldn't be replicating it. What about you? Do you have you replicated any of your pieces? I know that you don't normally, like you said, do things on a whim. So
no, I have never. Far as I know, I've never replicated anything outside of like replicating it on pieces that go with like an outfit, like in terms of like the same design kind of thing on an outfit.
Like it's all going to the same person.
Like it's all going to the same person, yeah. I don't want to say I try not to replicate my flowers. I do replicate, like, because I mean, I have like standard designs where I have drawn out a design someplace and then I maybe tack it onto one outfit here, and then maybe 3 years I pull it out and I say, oh, that would look good here, but it doesn't have anything, it doesn't flow at all the same in terms of like, it's just like the same flower. It's like a round flower, say, or a pointy flower or whatever. I guess I set myself up in a difficult situation when I kind of said to myself, I always want to try to challenge and do something different every time. So now I kind of have it set in my way that I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. But after a while, you sometimes tap out. And I think, and I've been thinking about this more and now since I'm in this beading hold, and we talked about it on the last podcast. And I was just I'm like in awe of people who are able to do multiples of earrings or moccasins or whatever. Like I'm kind of in awe of that. And I'm kind of like toying around with it in my mind just because, fingers crossed. And maybe by the time this podcast comes out, I'll have gotten into a show. And with that being said, then I would have to start producing in the midst of doing some some custom work, and then maybe working on a larger scale piece. But I think that in order to be productive, maybe having replicas, maybe in terms of like design, but not necessarily color themes, like different themes, would be very beneficial, because then it could be like not mass produced, but just give me a way out to not have to be so, it sounds so bad, so creative, but like to have to think really. Because right now I feel like I'm not necessarily in that space of really thinking and hashing out some really in-depth thing. So I think I've really been thinking about like replicating some stuff, and not that I want the go ahead from somebody, but I think the reassurance that it's not to say that it's okay, but I don't know. I'm just, like I said, I'm just toying with the idea, and I've never really done that before. So I'm really just sitting with that, and hopefully I can do it, but I don't know if I can. So,
well, it is something though that we're seeing more and more, where like art doesn't always have to be super different and create. Like, I don't want to say creative, because that sounds like if you're replicating that, it's not a creative art, because it is, because you're still doing a lot of differences, even when it's the same design. So there are a lot of beadwork artists that I've seen who replicate the exact same, say a floral pattern. It's the same layout and all of that. And it's beautiful in the sense that because each time it comes out, it's a different color. So it kind of makes it all fresh and new again. And it does look completely different, you know. I've seen a few beaders where it's the same design, but it's used on multiple things. So it's not, you know, it's been like they used it for a barrette, or then they've used it for a bracelet, or then, you know, so those kind of things, but it's the exact same thing. So I like how it's innovative, where it's the same thing, but it's just done in different platforms, you know, on those, in that case too. So anyways, I like the whole idea of that, like having it multiples and kind of just redone, but in different ways, you know. Another question, I guess. So we were saying like this is basically like a bead soup type of podcast today, because there were a lot of different questions that came out on our Instagram, and people reaching out and had different things. I'm just going to jump back to a question that somebody had was, how much time have you spent beading to get to the level you're at?
How much time have I spent? My youngest son is 7. I would say it's only been really in the last maybe 10 years that I've really honed what I think would be my niche in terms of like what I would see as my art form, I guess maybe. I mean, beadwork is my art form, but my real maybe aesthetic has really only been maybe solidified in the last 10 years, which means like there's obviously more room for growth all the time. It's never like stagnant, I don't think. But yeah, so about 10 years. So I don't know how many hours that would even be. But I think what happens is that for me, my optimal learning happens during March to say maybe October, which is kind of odd because that's really like the downtime for people to bead, really, I think, because a lot of times people are beading like more in the winter months. But for me, because it's like 3 months before graduation and it's like 5-6 months before a show or something, like depending on what show you go to, but I'm talking about Santa Fe in this case, for me. So that's like the optimal time for me. And then, of course, after I finish a show, which is in the end of August, well, like I said, Santa Fe, I'm on like a bead hype. Like I am hyped. I've gone to Santa Fe and I've done whatever and I've seen all these things. And you really like, it's an experience. And unfortunately, you can't really experience it all. I don't think as an artist, if you're showing there, because you have to be at your spot or whatnot, but just the vibe. And then like, if you're able to maybe go and purchase some new materials and stuff from that area, you come home feeling really re-energized and ready for the next project, which will last about maybe a month and a half to 2. And then you're kind of be like, oh, for me, I kind of go down in a spiral in terms of like beading where I'm really productive September, October. I got all kinds of new designs and everything's going great. And then it's just like a lull and then it kind of restarts itself all over again. So I think for me, in terms of my most productive time is those months, but it's also during those years that I'm actually doing the shows. And I think it's just because for me, it really is a huge challenge to try to make something that's innovative and different and something really out there that, not that I wouldn't necessarily make it for here, but it really is, for me, it's a different aesthetic because what it is that you're trying to really reel in those people who not necessarily will buy it, but there's a whole, like, there's aesthetic for Kahnawake, there's aesthetic for, say, somewhere in Six Nations, there's aesthetic for someplace out west or even like somewhere like way maybe down south or whatnot. There's different things that people gravitate to, like colors and different like maybe designs or stuff like that. So it really challenges me because I know that the majority of people who are at those places are from the south. So they may want more earth tones in terms of like turquoise or terracotta or something like that. And maybe the purples and all that kind of stuff might not be so enticing for them. Maybe it would be, but I find a lot of more earth tones like that are more attractive to that audience. So it really allows me to be more, I don't want to say more creative. It just allows me to tap into a different side of what my creativity is. And I think that really helped me to have a jumping point for how I became the artist I am. And it sounds so like not narcissistic. It just sounds very me kind of thing. But that's the question, right? Like what was the question? How long does it take you to be?
How much time have you spent beading to get you to the level you're at?
Yeah, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of time. And as the amount of successes I've had in this quote unquote spotlight are the same amount of having to go back to the drawing board and nobody even knew. Like, it's not all like flat stitches and huge raised flowers. It's a lot of like cutting out and redesigning and erasing and rethreading and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's really what it is. There's more of that than there is of like the success and people buying, because you really have to like try and fail and do all that kind of stuff.
I think it's an interesting question too, because I had this discussion about levels and about people's learning and things like that. And it's sometimes you can't put a timeline on it either, because there are some new beaders that are coming out there who have just started within the last few years who look like they have been beading all their lives.
Yes.
Where they're I call them prodigies, because there's things on their beadwork where I'm like, holy hell, like, you know, like I started learning those things just recently, and this person's only just started doing that, or, you know, so I I find you can't really put a cap on beginning times, like learning times and all of that, because everyone has a different learning style, learning rate, learning curve time, all of that. So yeah, sometimes I find some people just have it and it goes real quick. Some people need more time. Some people need all the layout and the nitty gritty, details and, they need to know every little thing to elevate their work, so it's I don't really know if you could put a cap on time, like for your levels or anybody's levels and all that. This kind of like goes into like another topic that we were talking about. We just kind of titled it like the importance of making mocks from scratch. And it's not just moccasins, it's anything in general. The importance of starting a process, going through it, and seeing it to the end. Whether it's a success or a failure, the importance of doing that process and what you're learning from the process, So I'm just going to toss a line in here that we, we always bring up and we joke about, but we call it jumping the line. So jumping the line. So do you want to talk about what that means, jumping the line?
So maybe just to clarify a little bit, what happens a lot of time is that people are very enthusiastic, right? And they want to get their projects done, or they have this great idea. And sometimes they don't necessarily know how to execute the idea to the fullest. They might have like bits and pieces they might know about, but they really want to do this, which is wonderful. But it's not necessarily, maybe it doesn't necessarily jive with my timeline as a teacher, let's just say. We'll just say generically, let's pretend I'm a teacher. So, like I'm a teacher and I'm teaching a class and I have a student who wants to do something, and unfortunately, I don't have the time to teach it, right? I don't have the time. It's like trying to get the fast pass at Disneyland, like they want it so badly, and you just can't do it. You can't physically give them what it is that they need to finish that project. Sometimes it's frustrating for the simple reason that the person who's trying to execute that project has to realize that sometimes their project isn't as important to somebody else as it is to them, and that they have to be patient. And it has a lot to do with like knowing where it is you are in terms of your ability. It's about also learning or knowing that it's okay to not get it right the first time and to keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And although it's frustrating because you have this idea in your head and you can't get it out and you can't execute it to its full potential, you have to be willing to take the time, and it really is time, to try it out yourself. And yeah, asking somebody for help is okay, but sometimes you're jumping the line. You're trying to cut in front of somebody else who's doing something of their own, whether it's the artist or the artist has like a whole other bunch of people that they're trying to help and you can't do it. Is that what you were talking about? Because I think that's what it is. Or maybe I just went on a tangent. I don't know.
It's a little bit about that. So part of the perfect example that I had was that I do teach. So in some of my classes, sometimes people will make a joke like, they'll complete their beadwork and then they'll turn around and say, well, it doesn't look like yours. Or my flowers, my beadwork isn't lining up. It doesn't look like how yours is. So sometimes those are brand new beaders, so in sometimes in that sense, it's like that's jumping the line where you're brand new. You do need time. You do need to develop some skills. Like some people can get it immediately, and sometimes it, like you said, it's a process. It takes time. You have to learn. You have to see how things go. So there was something I had said earlier, and I said, like, I'm not sharing and teaching people to be me.
Oh, to be the artist that you are. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm not teaching you so that you become me and how I bead and my style and all of that. Like, of course, if that's something that you like or whatever, then yes, you get that inspiration. But as a learner, or I should say as a teacher, I'm teaching you to be your own bead worker. Take the knowledge that I'm giving, that I'm sharing, and make it your own. Elevate it, make it better than mine. Do
like change the designs.
Yeah, change it up. Do your own, come up with your own flowers. And not to say that you can't use what I've taught or anything like that, because those, to me, a lot of that, it's all universal stuff. I don't own flowers. I don't own vines. and I'm not claiming it, but that's what I like. That's so when I do my stuff, that's the stuff I like. And it's not to say I own it, because everybody, everyone does that. Everyone enjoys those things. So as a learner, I think that's what it is that you're taking what people are giving you and elevating it. Sometimes I don't understand why you would want to do the same as another artist, because yes, their stuff may be beautiful, but it's already there. It's already out there. Make something better, make something newer, whatever. So that's like kind of my views on like jumping the line. I also look at it like the necessary learning, as,
because you mentioned something about like finishing a project till it's completed. And I think that's really important. I think what happens is that depending on what kind of maybe learner or person you are, like sometimes like I have a million unfinished projects, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of unfinished projects. And I think what happens is that during a class, if it becomes a little bit too difficult or frustrated, or something happens, like something like, what if something happens in your personal life that doesn't allow you to finish that project? It kind of goes in the backside, and then you might want to pick it up later on, but you don't necessarily know how. And so you're trying to find how to finish it. If any of those other extenuating circumstances don't happen, you should really try to finish your project in the allotted time for the class. Because one, you paid for the class, so you want to get your money's worth. And two, you have the opportunity that this person is now able to teach you within the allotted time, in the allotted time that you've signed up for the class. Now, we talked about this too. Like, like I have people reach out and ask me different things about how do you do this? How do you do that? And I don't mind sharing or whatever. And this is going to be harsh, everybody. And it's not directed at anybody or anything. But we had talked about, when do you cut the cord? When do you tell a student, a peer, a mentor, anybody, you got to go it alone? When do you cut that cord off and say, I can't give you any more? How do you deal with those who want to take your beading soul? And that's what it feels like sometimes. Like sometimes it feels like people are just trying to extract every ounce of knowledge you have about what, and it could be anything. It could be like photography. It could be it could be anything. It runs the gamut, whatever somebody has knowledge, right? And so when do you cut the cord? How do you deal with those who want to take your beading soul? Without alienating those who want to learn, right? Because you don't want to do that. But you have to like have your own practical experiences, in the sense where, like, I've had many experiences where I put way too much darn glue on something and then I can't get my needle through what it is I'm trying to bead because there's too much glue. Now, one, it might happen like 2 or 3 times. Eventually, I might realize that maybe there's too much glue. Like, I'll make changes to whatever. Maybe I'll make changes to my stabilizer. Maybe I'll make changes to my velveteen, or maybe my beads, my needles, anything. Eventually, I'll get to the point where, maybe I'm putting too much glue on. Like, you make alterations to everything until you find out what works for you. That's what's needed. Like, yes, people are sharing. Yes, you take a class to get some like tips and tricks. But sometimes you just gotta go it alone, and you have to just make the experience your own. And if you come up to a roadblock, you have to use some critical thinking in terms of how to solve the problem. Because today, like we were talking about, like how does social media play for beadwork? It's a lot easier to ask somebody for help, right? Like before, maybe you had to like make a phone call and do that kind of other stuff, or wait till maybe you met them on the street or something. But now it's like instantaneously you can get information from anyone, basically at any time.
At any time, and that's it. And people sometimes are, with social media, I find sometimes people are easily accessible. And for me, even, I've questioned, because I'm a teacher, when am I being a crutch to people's learning? Of course, I want to teach, I want to help. I don't mind all of that. But when do I become that crutch where people stop attempting on their own? And, like for the most part, I don't always mind when people reach out. When I am at my limits, though, I will post it. Like, please don't ask me anymore. Like, my reality sometimes, because I'm a teacher, because I put myself out there as a helper, I don't mind. But sometimes it becomes overwhelming, where middle of the night, I'm getting inboxes. How do I make this? Like holidays, I'm with my family, and it's like I'm getting inboxes like, hey, how do I make my moccasins or whatever? So also, I guess because I don't know why, and I shouldn't, but I always feel obligated to answer and to help and support everyone. So sometimes I struggle with that, like when do you cut the cord? You know, when is it okay to say, well, you know what, like right now, I just don't have it in me to help you. And we were joking about this. And, you know, like, I think every bead worker at one point in time, like, will stop and say, like, do people think I'm a bitch? You know, like, because sometimes not everyone wants to help, and it's not about the person, it's not about the situation, but sometimes we just don't always have it to give more. So, and that sounds awful. It does. It sounds like, oh, like you're gatekeeping, you're holding all the information. But it's the reality is that I can't be accessible all the time to everybody when they need it. So it's hard. It's trying to find that balance between support, enabling, sharing, you know, all of those things. So I don't know when, honestly, for myself, I don't know when to cut the cord. I think for my own personal sanity, sometimes when I start feeling resentful, that's when I know, like, I've probably already crossed the line, because I'm getting to a point where I'm like, I don't want to help. I don't want to do anything. Like, don't ask me. That's how I feel. And I don't like feeling like that. So I know that I've allowed...
boundaries have been crossed.
Exactly. Like, I've let people come too far in, because, yeah, I don't like feeling like that. I don't want to, because by nature, I am a teacher too. And I do enjoy doing it. But yeah, it's setting those fine lines, you know, to say, okay, no, like, I need a break, you know, please don't ask. And I've done it. Like, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, where it was becoming too much, where I was at the store, I'm at work, and people are showing up with their stuff to say, how do I put this together? But I'm at work right now. Like, I can't, you know, so
yeah. Like, it infringes on your personal time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of teachers go through that, whether it's teachers at beadwork or teachers in general. Like, you're always bringing work. It always seems like you're always bringing work home.
Yeah. And then it becomes work. That's the problem, is that when it starts to feel like work, then it's not cool anymore. You know, like, I love teaching you, but when I'm able to teach you, I guess, you know, when I openly open myself up to do that. So
I think it has a lot to do too with, like, when I said, like, how does social media play? A lot of times social media plays in terms of, like, texting or inboxing messages and all that kind of stuff. And and this is something I wrote in my book here, my notes. It says, beadwork, to be successfully taught, sometimes it has to be hands-on, especially for those who don't know the lingo. And sometimes established artists just don't have the time to write a novel about how to make your puckers better. And I don't have maybe necessarily the time to do a Facebook Live or something to do that. And it's harsh. Like, even saying that, I'm like, oh my God, people inbox me all the time. Like, you know, like, for me, if I don't want to answer your question, I won't answer it.
Yeah. So here's a question. So this is what I've heard, or as an artist, as a bead worker, as part of, you know, Haudenosaunee culture, what are your responsibilities as an artist? So people have asked that, like,
oh my God, that is a deep question. That's not a question we even talked about in,
you know,
in
like, I'm just thinking of it now, because it has been asked, what do you feel like because, you know, like, we're taught that when you have something, when we have gifts, or and this is a gift for people who can do these things, that's a gift to be able to create beautiful things and all of that. What is your responsibility? You know, it's the same with language. We always have that. When you learn language, there's a responsibility to continue teaching it on. So how do you feel about that? And it kind of fits into this with the boundaries, with, you know, are you always obligated to share and teach? So what are your thoughts on that?
My first and foremost thing is, one, I don't believe it's my responsibility to handhold you and to make you do the things that I am doing well at. First and foremost, do I think it's my responsibility to help foster appreciation and maybe even encourage you to do those things? Yes. I can't do them for you, as I did not expect anybody to do them for me. And I think that's realistic, because in order to be successful in any of the things that you might have said, cultural knowledge, language, artistry, or all that kind of stuff, you have to have a drive to do it. And you were talking about a crutch. Like, we all know those things are important, like, for longevity and sustainability and all that kind of stuff. But it has to come innately from inside yourself about how to do those things. But yeah, like my first instinct is to say that I don't want to say I'm willing to help, because yes, I'm willing to help those who are willing to help themselves, period. And I think that's my responsibility. I also believe my responsibility is to maintain integrity of the art. However I see that as integrity is my thing. That's why I feel integrity, and to be able to encourage, really, I guess, like, I don't want to discourage anybody. I think that's a responsibility. But really, like, the person who wants to learn or do it has to do it.
And that's it. I find that the difference is now, in the sense that, say, when you started learning or when I started learning, we didn't have social media like the way it is now. I couldn't just, open up a phone and look through a million different things and say, oh my God, okay, like, you basically have like a whole choice of like different styles, different looks, different colors.
And let me count these beads and see how much they use. Yeah. That's what somebody said, like, about zooming in, like counting beads, and like, yeah, like that's true. Like,
Exactly. So I find that at that time, I don't really know if that's the differences now, to say that, like, yes, social media does play. I guess it does, in the sense that maybe from when I was learning, like, I had to just learn. I just had to do it, like, because until Merritt came around, like, until she started opening up classes and all that, that's when I really started learning more, from her style and her, just seeing the whole differences, opposed to what I was doing, which, was really just what I thought
it was supposed to be.
It was supposed to be, yeah.
Like your interpretation of the art form, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not even going off of anything. It was just because there was nothing out there, unless you looked at old books or the chance that you would see somebody wearing. Because even that, like, when I was, I can't say that it was totally out there the way it is now. Like,
people weren't dressed up in regalia when they went to the Gunasisne, or
no.
where you would see them dressed in like your typical like ribbon shirt, whatnot, at a graduation.
The level of what it is now is
like the adornment was not there as much.
Yeah, and it was only with select people or families and things like that. It wasn't as out there as it is now. So it was like, now you could really see all the different influences. You could see all the different, not influences, but like examples of what you would want to, where you could go with it, basically, So there's so much more that's out there, I guess, kind of thing. So
what do you think your responsibility is?
I don't know. Well, I can teach, and like I said, like, that's I guess part of a gift. I don't know if you call it that, but whatever. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy teaching at my levels of what I want to teach. So, like, I don't mind doing it. So my responsibilities, I feel sometimes is, what, if I can teach it, I will teach it. I don't mind. But sometimes, I don't want it to feel like a burden. I don't want it to feel like it's solely my responsibility to teach anybody. My biggest thing too is that, we kind of joked about it, but it's like shit or get off the pot sometimes when you're doing beadwork. Like sometimes you have to just do it. You have to learn it. You have to fail at it. You have to try, because if I'm giving you my pattern, if I'm giving you my florals constantly, if I am basically watching you stitch every stitch, I'm not doing you any favors, because the next time you try to go through it, I'm not going to be there. And
you might not have the time to give that person.
Exactly, to constantly support. So in those cases, then yes, I feel like, that's when it's sink or swim. You got to do it on your own. You have to push through and just do it, And for the most part, I believe like there's a lot of people who do that, obviously, because we have so many beautiful beadworkers now. But for anybody who's going through that process and the learning process, it is necessary to have somebody that could help you or whatever. But don't create like a dependency. You have to depend on yourself a lot of the times too, and just do it. I don't know.
And I think that's maybe the downfall of social media, maybe, in terms of that, of being able to see something and wanting to, because you only see that isolated picture. You don't see like the hours and hours it took to do that, or like, like the thrown designs on the floor because it didn't work or whatever. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we're new, we're trying new things. I can't be scrolling on like Jamie Jacobs's quill work and say, oh man, I really want to do quill work like that. Yeah, I really want to do that.
Well, what's the reality
100%,
of it?
It's not going to be anything near like the quality that he can produce.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to be realistic with myself going into the new learning that that's what's going to happen. And maybe eventually, years down the line, maybe, or maybe not. Like if I'm one of these newbie beaders who can just like create this stuff and it's wonderful, then great. Like the jumping off point, I think now for a lot of beaders is higher than maybe when we all started off in our small bead groups or maybe learning from our grandparents or stuff like that. It's more like, I don't know, like there's something going on with this like generation of bead workers. It's like out of this world. And I can't wait to see what happens for the next generation, and to see like, like we're so,
yeah, because everything's evolving. There's an evolution to a lot of the styles and, just even beads, like colors and the accessibility to everything. Yeah. But it's funny that you were saying that too, like, because I look at it like people don't always see that process. You see, I posted up moccasins and you see it. But even for me, I only just recently started actually drawing up my stuff. Like,
oh, yeah, you used to just do it freehand.
Yeah, so for a really long time, just up until maybe last year.
Yeah, I think it was last year.
So now I have such an appreciation for all the work that had gone into it beforehand because, you look at people's beautiful beadwork and you don't see that, they're sitting behind that beadwork, measuring it out, doing their placement. Everything is drawn up onto a piece of paper. Then you got to like reverse it if it's moccasins or you got to do whatever. That takes a long time, and now I have an appreciation for it because now I'm doing it more and I'm like, oh man, I like how it, how it comes out is you get obviously everything matches a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I was just doing everything freehand before, but even just now, like, I've been beading for however long, but I'm like, oh, okay. Like I have an appreciation. I'm still learning and I'm still, whatever. So there's so many different processes behind those pictures that go up and what people see, and the time that's put in and
then I always think like when maybe say Grant Jonathan or somebody else posts older beadwork. I can't remember who. Yeah, it was Grant. He was away on the weekend or something, and he went to a museum or he did something, and he had all of these pieces he was posting on Facebook and Instagram. And I thought, oh my God, look at all this great beadwork. It was like the classic white flat designs and whatnot. And I thought to myself, like, what were the light conditions when those things were made? And what was the access to supplies and how many children did that person have and where did they find the time and did they have their own gardens and did they have running water and all of these other things? Because I think like, oh man, like that's what I think about when I see beadwork is I think about all of the things that we do and not to say that men don't do beadwork or do art forms like that or whatever, but for me, the majority of people I know are women who do beadwork. And I just think about all that time that they are giving to this art form and what it is that they're not doing or how they fit it in. Like, like we were talking last time about like, I would bead in the morning and I would do all this stuff and all that. I just really think about all that kind of stuff. And
it reminds me of like a story of, my mother would tell me about how she was raised by her grandmother and she lived with her. So she would always tell me because my great grandmother was an avid bead worker. That was their income. So how she would do it would be in the summers, they wouldn't really be beading. The summers was the time for sales and things like that. So they would be at the Indian village up the hill. They'd be selling there or they'd be selling at mostly there, but maybe sometimes other places. But beadwork was for winter months. So she said that a lot of her aunts, her great aunts and stuff like that, or friends, like neighbors would come through and they would almost have like an assembly line. So just to kind of get through the winter too, it's their downtime a little bit because now they don't have the chores to do. They don't have all those other things. So yeah, that would be their winter months would be, getting together, making an assembly line. And then, one person's gluing, one person's doing this, cutting, whatever. And then they would all just kind of be together and prepare for the summer that's when they would do their sales and try to get all of their their money for the winter, basically, or for whenever. So that's kind of what it reminded me of, like, just like imagining all these like little women like sitting in a kitchen, like with probably super dim light, especially in the winter time.
And I'm sure some of them had their kids too, right? Like not everybody's kids were all the same age. Like, there must have been some babies there or something. Or
yeah, my mother at the time, like her stories, she was a little bit older. So sometimes she would sit and help them, like she would be part of the assembly line, whatever her capacity was that she could do, and she would help out and things like that. So I always like those stories though, they're interesting to hear the differences of how things were back then and versus some things have changed and some don't, some haven't changed, because it's, kind of this similar still, I guess, but just in different capacities,
Well, it was I don't know how many years ago. I'm not sure if we talked about it in the podcast, if we talked about it individually somewhere, but like there was time when they were talking about having a collective. But maybe a few years back, they were talking about like, let's have a collective where we all put our, like, I guess, beadwork together and people just sell, maybe not necessarily in consignment, but that kind of way, or creating a project where maybe in the same regards, like everyone did their own part of the project and different things like that. And I don't know, I just thought about that because it just sounds so more like, it sounds like a collective rather than individual artists like we're working now and different things like that. But then even then, I don't know how it would work or anything, but I think they were talking about that before.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I don't know how, I've never asked that question, how. I should ask my mother about how they did it, because now if there's an assembly line of women all helping each other, like, are they splitting profit? Or is it like, okay, everyone bring your stuff and we'll all help everyone. So whatever you do is your money, so because money was tight at the time. So how did they, that's an interesting question that I'll have to ask my mother. And
like, I remember faintly hearing, and I can't remember who it was from, faintly hearing a story where there would be a woman and she would hire out women to do a certain thing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So like, maybe they would do all, like, cut all the hearts out and then put all the fabric on or whatever. And then somebody else would do something else and do it that way. And as you did that, you got paid for your skill. And then maybe like that's how you made money. I'm not 100% sure, but it'd be real interesting if anybody out there who's listening to our podcast would like to share any stories maybe about their family doing beadwork in this way that Margaret and I were talking about, then please send us a message through Instagram or maybe through our Iorì wase podcast site. Then please do so. It'd be greatly appreciated, just because I think it's just people have been asking us to tell stories about different things. Now, I don't have any personal stories because my family didn't. Margaret has personal stories. But it'd be interesting to have some other people come in and just share, or maybe not even come in, but just like relay their stories to us and maybe we could tell them or whatnot. But that'd be interesting. It'd really add some new conversation maybe, and just some different perspective, I guess. So our next topic is, Margaret.
So this one is this is a juicy question, I guess. This is going to lead into all kinds of places. Okay, so some of the questions that have been around for a very long time, people have asked. We recently got a question about it. How do you feel about non-Haudenosaunee? That does not mean just non-Ngwehunwe, just non-Haudenosaunee people doing raised beadwork. So what are people's feelings, thoughts on that? So that's kind of a loaded question because I think there's a lot of layers to that. And I thought it was really interesting, the topic that was brought up about how people's views on non-Haudenosaunee people doing raised Iroquois style beadwork. And I know that some people felt that they weren't comfortable with that, or if they were, that it was being credited, or it was just kind of being put out there as a disclaimer as to where the style is coming from. So, Leith, what are your thoughts on this topic?
You asked the question, so you get a chance to think about your answer if it's not already created in your mind. Okay, so to be fair, we talked about this for a while before the podcast, and we had some laughs and we had some heated discussion, not with each other, but just in general about the topic. The only way that I could really wrap my head around this and find a real cut answer was, if I am an Iroquois raised beadworker, that's one of my areas. That is like the area that I focus on. If I go to a show and there are other people at the show who are not Haudenosaunee doing the artwork, well, I want to be the only one. If that's who I am, like, not that I want to be the only one doing the beadwork, because that's not true, because there's other artists who are Haudenosaunee who are doing that beadwork too. But I don't know, like, if that's our niche, and I'm saying our in the sense of Haudenosaunee, that's our niche, part of our thing, then not that I want to be recognized for it, but that's kind of
that's part of who we are.
Yeah, but it's also like, not to say that's what we know how to do. That's our contribution to what this is doing, like our contribution in terms of like, this is my contribution to the difference is in the different art forms that are at the show or whatever. Every artist has their different aesthetic and all that kind of stuff. But this is a specific art form for this specific people in the broad sense of the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, hatever you want to say it, Haudenosaunee, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of like, before I was like, I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. But if I come to somewhere and I'm this and you're there and you're, let's say, Margaret had a really good example. And she said, well, what if I went to a show and I did Hopi pottery, but I'm not Hopi? Well, that is blatantly, like, I think everybody would be like, what's up with that,
Yeah.
So I think, what's up with that then? Like, I could only really see it as clear as mud when I said it that way about the show, and then when you gave the example about the Hopi pottery. That's true. I think that would be kind of, not to say odd, I don't even know what the vocabulary I would use to describe that, but I don't know. It's not.
Like, is it cultural appropriation? Like, if this is my part of my culture and I'm there representing somebody else, like, yeah. For me, honestly, I don't know. I've never really, I guess, thought about it. So I don't really have I don't have any feelings on it too much. I guess I do a little bit, but other than Ngwehue, I kind of feel like I don't care. I guess I don't care. But I do like the idea of what somebody had said, that, then maybe it needs to still have disclaimers as to where they got this from, because and know that this is not mine. I don't, this is not part of who I am, but
because specifically what happens is that, and the person, and I'm going to thank you for the person who reached out on Instagram and brought this topic to our attention. They call it 3D beadwork. So yeah, so it's 3D now. But when I enter a show, I call it Iroquois raised beadwork.
Yeah.
It's not 3D. So I don't know.
Because it's kind of like, that's where things get lost and that's where things get blended, where the originality gets lost. People don't know where it comes from anymore, because people like that, like, things are always evolving, things are always changing. And to keep some of that true to where it comes from, that's why sometimes I feel like, yes, giving props to where things come from is necessary, so that it's not the lines aren't getting blurred, and it's like, oh, okay, well, who did this? Where did this start? And what is it? So for me, with other Ngwehue, that's kind of how I feel. I don't personally have anything against that. I've had other like Métis, Anishinaabe asking me, how do you do it? Because a lot of them have their own style. They have their own flat stitch and different things like that. So in those cases, I don't mind sharing. And I don't mean like, oh, give props like that. It was me. It has nothing to do with me, but the art form itself, that it is part of all of us and it's part of our people. And this is where it originated from. That's where I feel like the credit needs to be still given. The other hot topic is what about non-Ngwehue learning? So that's non-Ngwehue people learning all the beadwork.
All the beadworks. Is that what you said? All the beadworks?
The beadworks. So this is like so this is a hot one.
Okay, so everybody, just to give you a perspective on what is going on at the beading table right this second, is my eyes are closed and my fingers are on my eyeballs thinking, okay, how are we going to gauge, how am I going to tackle this situation, this question? I'm going to talk one thing about the first question about the Ngwehue, other nations. I would never say stay in your lane with that. I've done a pair of Sioux moccasins, I'm not going to start saying no, like all that kind of jazz. I don't believe I have the right to say that, to say no one can use it. Everyone can be influenced from somebody. I can't control that. Now, have I used Sioux flat on moccasins? I've sold them? Yes, I have. Have I also incorporated raised beadwork in that? Yes, I have. I'm going to say, and it might offend people, but I'm going to say it because sometimes it's really like staying in your lane sometimes, I guess. I don't know. It's Margaret, I'm going to tell and be honest, that is like a very loaded question. Have I taught people who are not Kanien'kehá:ka in Kahnawake? I'm not Kanien'kehá:ka, but have I taught not Kanien'kehá:ka people how to do beadwork? Yes, I have. That being said, I taught teachers who are teaching
Our children.
children how to do beadwork, how to have cultural appreciation for art and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I have. Have I also taught those people how to say Ungwahua words so that they can be able to talk to the kids and teach them some Ungwahua neha? I have. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm. Have I taught some Joe Blow just off the street because they wanted to? No. Mm-hmm. Would I? I don't believe so. I think it depends on the context. I think in this day and age, with a lot of appropriation of different things that are happening, especially to Ungwahua artists, I think people have to be very cautious. Mm-hmm. And am I cautious? Yes. I think that people who are teaching Ungwahua children, in order to have appreciation for that, if they aren't having, I think they have to be submersed into something. Like the teachers need to have the cultural knowledge.
Yeah.
If you're teaching, yeah. I believe so. Like, I really do. Like you have to have like that, like,
cultural awareness
or ethics or something. It's, or even now, like for teachers who are teaching, they say, if you're teaching, you should be more aware of like the historical background of a certain place or whatnot.
Yeah.
For people who are teaching within communities, I think that's important too. You have to have like some kind of cultural awareness of where it is you're teaching or who you're teaching, period. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like sharing all of my stuff with somebody who just wants to learn because I don't know what you're going to do with it. That's the only thing I'm afraid of. Plain and simple is I don't know what you're going to do with it. And I don't want to be the one to open Pandora's box and then be the one who's...
then it's on eBay and it's everywhere.
Yeah, I don't want to ruin it for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even though it seems so like not 2022, or maybe it is 2022 now because people are more aware of the situation. And
I think it is. I think it's more, I think we have that right to say. I think we have the right to say so. And it's okay that if people agree or disagree with it, that's totally fine. I feel the same. I feel exactly the same because I teach. I have recently put it out there because in the beginning, I never thought of it. It was never something that crossed my mind until I did have people who were not Ungwahua wanting to take a class. And I also had to look at that and look at my views on it and whatever. And I felt the same where I was kind of like, I don't know what your intentions are. I'm not okay with somebody taking a class or learning and then reselling it and, and things like that. I'm not okay with that. I don't feel comfortable with that. So on top of it, another aspect that last year, 2 years ago, we had something where we did a group talk kind of thing. It was just an open thing. I think we did it on Zoom and it was just an open thing where a bunch of bead workers came in and we were all sitting there. We're all talking and everything. And when you're beading with a group of women that or you're all part of similar backgrounds, similar historical backgrounds.
Usually you're all in the same room.
Yeah.
So this was an exception.
Yeah, because we're through Zoom and it was an open thing. It was open to all. It becomes a safe space. It becomes a safe gathering for everyone to talk about, whatever. So when we were in that group, we realized there was a lady in there who was non-Ungwahua at one point.
And what happened is everybody stopped talking.
Yes, it was like the record scratched and everyone was like, ooh. Because whatever, like there was a sense of you didn't feel comfortable anymore, for whatever reason, that space. But
because she didn't identify herself either as not being Ungwahua. And somehow it just kind of, through the conversation, somehow it came out. And then it was just radio silence a little bit, very, very surface.
Yeah. So like in those cases, so I also look at that when I'm teaching too. I want to create a safe space for the women that I'm teaching. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about responsibilities. That's my responsibility as a teacher, is to create a safe space for the women that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. And not everybody is comfortable. Everyone has different views on. Some people are okay with it. Some people aren't okay with it. Mm-hmm. And for me, I would rather sit on the side of respecting people's views on it. And if you're not comfortable, then I don't want to open it to everybody for that reason. You know, first and foremost for our people, but also for that person. If there is somebody who is non-native taking the class, I also don't want them to feel unsafe and to be in an environment where they're going to be accosted or, you know, so, and it does happen regardless my views or whatever, or anybody, it could happen where, you know, people will say something that might upset either side.
Yeah, you don't want to offend anybody.
Exactly.
Really, yeah.
So just to avoid all of that, basically, like recently, that's what I've said. Like, my responsibility right now is to teach our own. That's how I feel about the situation. I feel like it's an art form that is for us, that we've had for how many, you know, generations now. And I want our people to learn it first and foremost. So if it means taking up a spot, you know, I would rather have our own doing it first and foremost. So that's kind of my views on it. And it's a touchy situation because you don't want to offend anybody, but that's the reality of it. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people do feel that way too, you know, and I don't know. It's just, it's a loaded question. It's a loaded topic, really.
Yeah, we had somebody on Facebook, because I put out, not Facebook, on Instagram, I put out a question about how do you feel, what's your feelings about other nations doing Iroquois raised beadwork? And somebody said more the merrier. Because, you know, because other people do certain things from other people. It's like, if you're going to be so hard line to say no one else is allowed, then people are going to say, well, you can't do that. You can't do anybody else's either.
You can't pull anyone else's out, You
can't find inspiration from anywhere else. And I think it's being inspired. I think it's like whatever. But I don't know if it would be so, well, the more the merrier in all of the world. People just keep doing everything how they want to do it. You know, like I don't think that's how I feel about it. I don't think more the merrier in that sense. I think that in terms of appropriation and whatnot, I think, you got to stay in your lane sometimes and in certain things and just do.
It'd be interesting to talk with somebody of a Sioux tribe and ask them, how do you feel if I were to do your moccasins or your style of beadwork, knowing that we have our own and where they would sit on it.
Well, for sure.
You know, like any nation, how do you feel about that? Yeah. You know, especially like within the groups that are reviving their culture or their arts and things like that. How do they feel? You know, so it would be interesting if like we got some, you know,
someone else is interested to talk about that or share their experiences or whatnot, then please, by all means, like let us know. It'd be interesting to hear your perspective and hopefully you can make that happen. Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. There's a lot of like it. So if you haven't noticed, the last 2 episodes have been kind of deep. It's not really like, so woohoo, like let's welcome to the bead table. And I think that's what happens is that just like at any beading table, things can be really joyous and full of laughs. And sometimes it's not so easygoing topics. Sometimes there are really some in-depth things that people talk about. There's some things that make you cringe and make you feel like uncomfortable. But like we were talking about before the podcast, is that things like this have to be talked about. Not that it has to be talked about on a podcast, but
why not?
But why not?
We're here, and why not? To me, I'm like, I look at it like I like transparency. So it's kind of like, this is the reality of it. This is what people talk about. These are the DM inboxes that people talk about. This is the stuff that I sit there and get enraged about and swear and yell about, you know, like this is the realities. And I think to have it on a platform where everyone can have some insight, their own discussions, having it interactive, it's perfect. Like, why not? You know, so, and that too, like not everyone's going to agree, which is completely fine, you know, because that's the way it is. But that's where you get like the good back and forth and different views, the dialogue and whatever. So,
yeah, I wanted to maybe like segue for the next podcast and maybe put it out there to anybody if you have any questions on like techniques, on how we select beading, on how we select beads, on the type of material we bead on, maybe our process of beadwork. We're going to touch a little bit about our own personal techniques and different things like that, and how we draw inspiration for colors and designs and all of that kind of stuff. Basically, what excites us about beading.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
So that will be our next topic for our podcast. And any final words there, Tekaronhiahkhwa?
No, I think that's about it. There is one topic that I would like to kind of reach out, and I would like to try to find a funny way of doing it. Like when I used to teach, we always used to like say like, okay, you know what? Teachers should come up with like they should write a book about all of the grievances or all of but in a funny way where it's like lightens up the stuff that happens. So it would be funny to have like a podcast where it's kind of like what grinds your gears, like those palm slapping your forehead moments where you're like, oh my God, you know, that would be funny to see like the different perspectives of artists who sell, who post things. Like, what are some of your funny experiences as a beader, as a seller, as a business person, like some of those things. So for instance, when you post, how many times do you post something with all the information and then you get asked in the inboxes, how much is it? When is it for sale? Like those kind of things. And
at what point can you just say, read what I already wrote?
Yeah. So those kind of funny things where you're kind of like, you know, everybody goes through it and everybody laughs about it because everyone's like, oh yeah, oh my God, yeah, that happened to me, you know?
Or can I buy a ticket? Well, the raffle's closed.
Yeah, it already went out. So those kind of things, you know, that would be funny to see, and something a little bit like lighthearted though, like not too, you know,
too in depth.
Not too dark and crazy.
Like today.
Yeah. So
I just want to encourage anybody who has any feedback to get in touch with us regarding either of our two potential podcast topics, what materials we use, how we find inspiration, or some funny personal experiences where you just want to like put your hand on your head and just say, oh my God, they're asking me this. Then please let us know. You've been listening to The Beading Table. Onikiwahi.
Oh no.
The views and opinions of the guests expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of Iorì and its employees.